submission is more of a gift to give to somebody that you really trust and honor. Got invited to a kink event by a Domme, and it just like blew my fucking mind.
It must have been so liberating to like go to a party and be like, oh, like this is what's been missing.
Yeah.
You are such a like strong entrepreneur. So you had 2 companies in your 20s which you sold. I love talking business.
Great.
You, like,
perfect.
Yeah, thank you for being on Thea.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Welcome back to another episode of Uncensored. Today we have Thea Wayne with us. Thea is a friend and a multifaceted entrepreneur and kinkster with a knack for reinvention. After building and selling 2 successful packaged product companies in her 20s, she pivoted into the world of sexuality and media, emerging as a creator and host of Sex Talk Radio, which I've been on. Through unfiltered, thought-provoking conversations, Thea dives into the messy, thrilling, and often misunderstood realms of sex, kink, and modern dating on her podcast. She's currently building Testy, a telehealth company designed to make in-person STI testing simple, accessible, and stress-free. Thank you for being on, Thea.
Of course. Happy to be here.
So we first met because I was starting my digital footprint, and you were like the first podcast I was ever on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
and I flew
Cool.
to Austin for some sessions, but also like to like meet you
Yes.
and do that. And that was a lot of fun. I think that was probably 2 years ago at this point.
Yeah,
1.5.
over a year and a half.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was the first podcast you were on. Yeah, because you were kind of going face out, right? Like it was a lot was happening on social for you.
I've been face out for like a year and a half since then, but like having a digital presence, right? It's one thing to be face out, it's another thing to be like, how much of my face can I get absolutely everywhere? And that was like one of the first I did. Yeah, and you made me feel so incredibly comfortable talking about it. And also like working through, I think, some of the like nerves of being interviewed for the first time.
Definitely.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was great. And you were like, I think one of the first, I went through this phase where I interviewed like so many DOMs back to back to back to back, which is funny because I was in like a very submissive era in my own personal life. So I think it was like, I was curious. The seed was being planted with all of you.
Yeah. You were mentioning like moments of the podcast that like you remember. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had been at that point, I had kind of had this sexual awakening living in Austin, Texas, and I was spending a lot of time like casually hooking up with people on Field, but as like a submissive person, which was just leading to some like unpleasant experiences, nothing like super awful or super violent, but just like unsavory, basically, because they were inexperienced with that dominance. And you said something in our interview where you were just like, basically, I don't know if I asked you if you had ever been submissive, but you mentioned that like from time to time you would switch, but like only for a woman. And it just kind of planted this seed of like submission is more of a gift to give to somebody that you really trust and honor. And since that, you know, I've learned a lot about that. There is a lot of trust involved. And I've just come back to that sentence a few times of like, yes, but only in this circumstance. And now I've kind of come to the other side of things and I'm similar. I'm much more selective because I see it as more of a gift. So, yeah.
And I stand by that quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I think it takes so much vulnerability and strength to hand yourself over to someone who, you know, you would hope to like take really good care of that and move you in certain ways.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's way too many like cis het men out there who think dominance is just this like just doing whatever.
They think
you know, like
basically to aggression.
Yeah, aggression and just doing absolutely whatever.
Yeah.
Without any consent talk, without any like emotional intelligence around what dominance is supposed to look like, right? How differently it feels from person to person.
And what I realized in that exploring was like I wasn't actually surrendering if I didn't feel safe. If I didn't really know the person well or trust them, I was not really being submissive. You know what I mean? Because there wasn't trust. So I was actually quite hyper alert and hyper aware during these encounters or sexual experiences.
Yeah, there's no letting go.
No, which is like the point.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're like pretending to be surrendered and submissive, I don't know. So,
Yeah. So, what got you started in sort of like the intimacy, sex education space?
Yeah. So, I grew up with pretty open-minded parents. So, like, I got like sex ed coloring books through childhood, like very open-minded, which is great. I don't think a lot of people have that. And started having sex as a teenager and exploring. A big part of my journey is sobriety. So I'm sober from alcohol, but during college, I was not. And sexuality for me was really combined with alcohol. So when I stopped drinking many years ago, the first time I stopped drinking many years ago, I got into a relationship right after that. And it was quite platonic and it was quite sexless. It was kind of like this obligatory weekly sex to, check it off the list and not have to talk about it. But during all of this, I'm like so disconnected from my sexuality and my desires that I was like, I remember at the end of our relationship, I was calling therapists that like talk to people about being asexual. Like that's how far I was disconnected from myself.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to be said for like, you can get along really well with somebody and have this like comfortable relationship. But I think a lot of people end up in these kind of platonic friend relationships out of comfort and ease. And that's kind of what I was in. And so we broke up. I moved to Austin, Texas, sober, got invited to a kink event by a Domme. And it just like blew my fucking mind. Like it was a bunch of hot people at this mansion, like tying each other up. And it wasn't outwardly like people were not nude, but it was erotic. And it was just like, I don't know, something clicked with that experience where I realized like basically what a horny person I am. But like I've been disconnected from even who I'm attracted to and what I like and like what does sex look like in sobriety and all of these things. So again, I'm an extremist, one end to the other. And I just like jumped into it, going to events, downloading fields, hooking up with a lot of people. And it's just been a really interesting journey.
Yeah, it must have been so liberating to like go to a party and be like, oh, like this is what's been missing.
Yeah.
Some people go their whole lives without realizing that, which is crazy to me. Like they go their whole lives not knowing like what is pleasurable.
Right.
And like experiencing a body in any sort of way.
Yeah. It was life-changing. And then I just kind of became involved with friends that were involved in the kink space or the sensuality space in Austin. And I, for many years, have listened, or in my 20s, I spent a lot of years listening to Dan Savage, who's a podcaster, OG sex podcaster. And I just like wanted more of that. I wanted more fun podcasts about sexuality. And so it kind of inspired me to do sex talk radio. Just felt like there wasn't a go-to name for specifically millennial women to hear about this stuff. But, it's kind of funny. It's like behind closed doors, a lot of women are talking about sex with their friends and men, I'm assuming too. But like, how can we get those conversations more public?
So when did you start sex talk radio? And what has that journey been like?
So I started it 2 years ago, and I started it, like I said, I was kind of like on the more submissive side of things with kink and exploring, and I wanted to have a well-rounded kind of list of guests that what I've found now mostly fall into the category of like academic or sex worker. I think that I just feel like that's the best way to keep it spicy for my podcast is like I want people to be learning from academics and researchers. But I also want to be hearing from people that are sex workers as well as people that just want to talk about sexuality. So I try to kind of paint a well-rounded picture. It's been fascinating. I mean, it's a lot of work. Like, as you know, like podcasts are a ton of fucking work and expensive.
Yeah, people don't realize. Like, it's a full-time thing.
It is. It's absolutely. That's what I always tell people if they ask me for advice. I'm like, it's a lot, and it's it really is like a passion project for me. It's like in a lot of these situations, my podcast isn't like highly profitable, you know, even though I have a ton of followers. It's like I care about these conversations. And I think especially under our current administration, it's like people are going to be resorting to these kinds of media channels to get information. And so, yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It's so important that this podcast is out too. I think there's so many sensationalized
Yes.
sex talk, radio shows.
Yes.
And you do such a good job of like keeping it entertaining and light,
Right.
but also like you have the real stories and
Yes.
having the educators there to like get down to the academic sort of like technical details.
Yeah, for sure.
When it's needed.
Yeah. Another kind of inspiring factor is as an entrepreneur and creator, like I get inspired when I'm pissed off about stuff. And so I would like, it fuels me, you know? And so I was seeing a lot of clips of men interviewing porn stars and sex workers that were super sensationalized. And they were like, you know, just clipping the moments where she's talking about the gangbang and all this stuff. And it's like, but like, what's her life story? Like, I care about that. So that was also kind of inspiration for me, was seeing a lot of these predominantly male-focused podcasts interviewing sex workers, where I was like, what would they feel comfortable sharing if they were talking to a woman, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I dislike about those podcasts too is the very obvious sort of like, you can talk about something salacious. And if the host reacts in where it's like, it's salacious and like, that's cool, like that happens, versus like what they tend to do, which is like react very strongly in a sort of like judgmental, stigmatized way in order for the clip to happen. I'm sort of like, same subject matter, different angle, and it makes a world of difference.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Those, and I don't feel like they get a ton of downloads. Like I feel like they're trying to get the viral clips, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, the landscape of the content creation industry right now. You are such a like strong entrepreneur. So you had 2 companies in your 20s which you sold. I love talking business. Can you like
perfect.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what those companies were about.
Yeah, sure.
What was that process like? Selling it, especially like at that age too.
So I went to college in Northern California in a place called Humboldt County, which is where like 80% of the weed is grown in the United States, or at the time it was. And so like I like to joke that I like left with like a master's in cannabis, because I literally did. I paid my way through college trimming weed on a pot farm. It was a very interesting life. And I just like, I learned a lot about the cannabis industry. So after college, I started a company called Humble Flower Co., and it was a cannabis-infused skincare company for like pain and arthritis. So you could massage it on for aches and pains. And THC and CBD, when they're together, are really effective for pain. So I built that. I started out of my studio apartment, and this was right before legalization. And it grew really fast, and it was like me taking my bulk items to the dispensary and getting cash. It was like total gray area, gray market type stuff. And I seem to keep finding myself in the taboo spaces, which whatever, I love it. And when cannabis legalization happened, I think it was 2016, I kind of merged with a larger company, because you had to, just like any kind of corporate entity, it's like they push out all the small guys. They make the barrier to entry when it was legalized became like $250,000 license that you had to have for manufacturing. So I just kind of jumped on with a larger company that purchased my company, and I worked for them for a while. I have noticed some interesting parallels. Like I feel like I learned a lot about what happens to something when it's legalized with cannabis, and I see a lot of parallels in discourses around sex work. So like if it were to be legalized, if it looked anything like cannabis, they came in and they took 40% from all of the farmers and people in California that were doing it legally. And it basically put all of my friends out of business that were like making a lot of fucking money. So it's kind of interesting to look at cannabis, and they're all the same in terms of like when a country or state decides to legalize something, what happens to it, which can be harmful, you know?
Yeah. And for people who are like not familiar with the different legal models, there's like 4 main models of like sex work legalization. There is full criminalization. There is partial criminalization, also known as like the Nordic model. There is full like decrim,
Yeah.
and then there's legalization.
Yes.
And most sex workers want to fall under what is known as full decrim.
Yes.
And the country, correct me if I'm wrong, the country that does like really well with this is Sweden, I believe, right?
I don't know a whole lot about that.
They do a pretty good job with the
Decriminalization.
Yeah, with decriminalization.
Okay. Oh, cool. I would love to look more into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the word Nordic sounds kind of like nice and light, but it's like the Nordic model is not good either. It's basically criminalizing either the client or the sex worker. I think it's mostly the client, right?
So Nordic model is it's decriminalized on the worker's end, but everything around the worker is still criminalized. So that would mean, the client would be criminalized. That would also mean if, depending on your borough, your state, if more than like 3 or 4 sex workers are like in a space together, that could be legally be considered a brothel. And on sort of like the landlord side, now the landlord is liable for that situation. And obviously that doesn't work in a very practical way, because if you criminalize everything around a sex worker, it's just going to make the sex worker do more dangerous work in order to protect the streams of income.
Yes.
But yeah, there's been a lot of different brandings for the Nordic model too. One is they're currently in New York. They call it the equality model.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah,
in New York, in the city.
Yeah, so there's I'm not super updated on some of this legal work, but there's been a push for the equality model to be passed in New York, even though right now in Manhattan it is partially decriminalized. But the process is still different. A person can get arrested, but the DA won't prosecute.
Okay, I've heard that. I've heard that like there hasn't been just like a sex work like bust in a very long time. Like they will if there's like drugs or trafficking involved, but that they're not like adamantly pursuing it. But I mean, I think I hope for decriminalization at some point. It's like sex workers need to feel safe calling the police if they're in a dangerous situation. Like there's things that like I feel like they don't have access to out of fear because of the current model. But.
Yeah, and I also think like, there's so many different so many different opinions on it. Like some sex workers think like we shouldn't even rely on the police at all, right? Because historically that's such a fraught relationship. And community safety is like always better than like state safety, right? A law can change and all of a sudden this person you've been calling to help you out is going to do the exact opposite, and they know your name, right? Like they know your face and name. Right. It's still quite fraught. There's also like class differentials and like race differentials within sex work, right? If you're a high-end white escort who's going to the Hamptons every weekend, you feel very safe. If you are a like street worker that the police are constantly policing for, for deportation or something like that, it's so different.
Yes. Huge spectrum.
Yeah, massive spectrum. But I think you're right. There's a lot of overlaps between the weed industry and the sex work industry around licensing too.
Yeah, it was just interesting to be so involved in it. So like I had this profitable kind of gray area company, but I was still paying taxes, but I was paying them in cash, and I was driving 3 hours away to pay them to the right department. And then everything switched overnight. It was legalized. The government took like 40% in taxes.
That's so much.
So many different protocols and regulations and testing that had to be done. And yeah, I think it can really negatively impact people that have been doing the thing, whatever it is, for a super long time. So, so then that company, basically, the parent company that I worked for, they closed the brand. They canceled the brand during the pandemic. It just like wasn't a highly profitable one for them any longer. And they let me go as an employee, which was a whole other story because it was like, a boardroom of rich men. And then I was like the 25-year-old. So that was humbling. But moved to Austin and started a latte powder company. So it was this really aesthetic, fun company that had adaptogenic mushroom powders in it for health and well-being. And the funny thing about that business was I basically had this like existential crisis the day I launched it. I realized that I don't like packaged product the way I thought. Like it takes a decade to build $1 million packaged product company, and you have to love the thing you're doing so much. And so that wasn't even a profitable sale when I sold that business. I found a home for it basically so that the brand and the packaging and the recipes could live on. But yeah, it was within, I think, 6 months of launching it that I decided to go in a different direction. It's a lot of work to build a packaged product company. You're constantly like trying to, get in front of a buyer at Whole Foods or all of these people, and it's a lot of schmoozing and you're paying for inventory. You're paying thousands to manufacture thousands and get shitty terms, and it just wasn't the direction I wanted to head in. So in my mind, I've always thought, okay, I want to get into the tech space next. Like that's super important to me to be able to reach more people, make more money. So yeah.
Yeah, what did you not like about the packaged product business outside of like the difficulty around distribution?
It was kind of the cash flow situation. So like, let's say you're manufacturing 1,000 units and it costs you $10,000. Well, you're ending up on like 60-day payment net terms with these grocery stores. And then you need to, a couple weeks later, you need to manufacture 2,000 more units, but you don't have $20,000. And it's just like the cash flow part of it was really tricky. And when you're building like a solid packaged product company like Poppy, for example, that I think just had like $1 billion acquisition, you always have to be raising money. And I had no experience with that. And I think something in my gut was telling me that like, this is not what you're meant to do for the next decade. You really are signing up for like a quite lengthy term with a brand like that. So I stopped doing that, and I did like business coaching and business consulting for a couple of years in Austin. I like love sinking my teeth into people's ideas and companies and businesses. And I also love trying to help people go viral on social media, which is really fun. So I did that for a couple of years before the podcast.
I do need to hire you to consult for me, like literally next month.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm in a place where I'm like, okay, I need another eye on everything that's been moving.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching this episode of Uncensored with MX Tomie. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're a very good sub. And don't forget to follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon, and all the other apps that I'm on. I'll see you on the next one.